Ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum and good afternoon. I am Rasool Bakhsh Rais. I teach at Lahore University of Management Sciences and I'm going to moderate this session. Uh, we have four very accomplished and distinguished writers, authors, historians, commentators on the floor today. And the subject that we are going to examine together is extremely important, not only for us as human beings or individuals or Pakistanis, not only for Pakistani state and society, but the region and the world at large. If you see the involvement of the international community in Afghanistan and parts of Pakistan. And the subjects are conflict, extremism, and Taliban. I would rather like to present these words and convert them into plurals: extremisms, conflicts, and the Taliban. We, in our individual capacity and as a nation, we have been trying to find answers to what has happened to this part of the world. And individually we do reflect back on the modernist vision and a dream of founders of Pakistan, their glorious legacy. And also we reflect on the struggles repeatedly peoples of Pakistan have launched to get their country back, redefine it in the mode of modern times as well as in relation to the dream and aspirations of the founders of this country. Failures, successes, troubles, and of course, the best way we can find some answer to the many issues and questions that trouble us is turn to those who have given a good part of their life to writing on these subjects. And four of the panelists that I have today, I'm very, very fortunate, and we're all fortunate to have four. Ahmad Rashid has written 4 books: Taliban and on Central Asia, the Jihad, and Descent into Chaos, and the 5th one is on its way, Pakistan on the Brink. William Dalrymple has written about 6 books. And of course, in his Indus journeys, and many others that most of you might have read, and if you have not, then please. His reflections on the Afghan jihad and Afghan war, Afghan conflicts, British involvement. Okay, now you hear me? Okay, so I'll keep it in my lap. Dr. Malia Lodhi is one of the brightest Pakistani historian, intellectual, political scientist, and of course a diplomat and a journalist. And again, an accomplished writer. Anybody who would like to understand Pakistan would definitely turn to what she writes in her columns, in her articles. We are also very fortunate to have Karmani, Naveed Karmani. He is of Iranian origin, but he has settled, his family is settled in Germany. He writes on academic issues, and he also writes on Sufism, Islam, and movements, and he writes in German language. So 4 of you, I'm going to raise some questions and leave it for you to answer those questions. And then you can also question one another on the answers that you give. I don't want to turn it into capital talk show, but a very different kind of conversation, intellectual and scholarly engagement, if we can find answers. And my first question, I think, which is very natural for every Pakistani. What has gone wrong in Pakistan and in Afghanistan? If you reflect back on last 2 or 3 decades, what are the insights that you will share with very anxious Pakistani young generation and policymakers at all levels? What has really gone wrong? Where did we do something very wrong, terrible, that has landed us into the situation where Pakistan stands today? I'll start with Ahmed.
Well, I think, in the 1980s, when the Afghan jihad against the Soviet Union was popular, we got hooked, frankly, into, if you like, trying to determine the future of Afghanistan. And that, unfortunately, has stayed with us for the last 30 years, whether it was in the 90s when we supported the Taliban, and of course after 2001, it was not out of, perhaps out of, we had to do a U-turn in policy, but again we were sucked into determining the output in the war in Afghanistan, because the Americans were our allies and we were the only land route. So for the last 30 years that I've been covering Afghanistan, we have been very deeply involved in trying to determine an outcome in Afghanistan. I think rather than trying to determine bringing the region together, bringing Afghan groups together, we have taken sides in the Afghan civil war. We have invariably supported Pashtun factions against non-Pashtun factions. There has been an element of state support continuously for decades for extremist groups, both in Kashmir and in Afghanistan. So, unfortunately, this is a conundrum that is going to take enormous amount of statesmanship from the military, from the civilians, in order to resolve. And at the moment, I'm not seeing that kind of statesmanship that is coming out of the government.
Naveed, would you like to respond to this question? You have recently visited Afghanistan, and you can also keep Iran, because that is a part of the region where the trouble is in mind. Has anything gone wrong there either too?
Well, I won't talk about what went wrong in Pakistan, because this is not my task here, and everybody, every single of you will know better about this country than me. I would like just to add one point to what Mr. Rashid said. It was not only Pakistan who was engaged in Afghanistan. It's for many years, the decades, that Afghanistan has become a country where different states of the world, including India, including Saudi Arabia, including Iran, including the United States, including Russia, used this place of the world to fight their war on the shoulders of the Afghani people. It's not saying that the Afghani people are not responsible for nothing. Of course they are. They had chances, several chances, but it's a country where, if you speak of sovereignty, then you have to speak about other countries. And of course, in the last years, in the international media, the Pakistani influence was very much emphasized, which has its reasons. But there are other states. The Iranian influence is maybe not that strong, but it's not more positive. It's as they have as much as they have their interest, as Pakistan has the interest, Iran has the interest too, and it's so it's about everything, but not about the interest of the Afghani people. What we are seeing, and even if the Afghani people would now sit and decide what they would like to do, they couldn't, because there are so many other players in this scene. So that would be the point to add to Mr. Rashid.
Thank you. It's a great honor to be sharing the platform with such distinguished people. I will take it from where Ahmed Rashid left off. I think he's absolutely right. We do carry the burden of history. There were historic blunders made, mistakes made. We weren't the only ones making them, but obviously we're responsible for our country and cannot hold others responsible for what went wrong, because we should have managed it, because after all, it was our country. But I think what I want to do is to take this forward, if I may. What are the lessons we've learned? I think what the lessons we've learned is, one, that we should not obsess about wanting outcomes in Afghanistan which the Afghans themselves may or may not want. And two, that this whole business that we talked about for 3 decades, we want a friendly government in Afghanistan, you will see that does not figure in the official rhetoric anymore. We talk about we want a stable Afghanistan and a peaceful Afghanistan. I think that's a very significant admission of a past blunder, where we constantly talked about that and did certain things which obviously backfired both for the people of Afghanistan and the people of Pakistan. I think the second lesson learned was that we do not want to see a reversion to the situation of the 1990s. This is not something that Pakistan would wish to see, because this brought so much grief to the region, and it led finally to the developments that in turn led to 9/11, and I don't need to go into those. So we don't want a repeat of that. I think that's a lesson learned. The third lesson is that there cannot be a Pashtun solution to Afghanistan. There has to be an Afghan solution to Afghanistan. And it is for the Afghans to figure that out. And whatever help Pakistan is asked to provide, Pakistan should be ready, able, and willing to provide that. I think the blunder of Pakistan not reaching out to the non-Pashtuns in Afghanistan is with us today. And I think there have been efforts to try to correct that, but the burden of history is very heavy. So I think the blowback, the consequences of certain actions, which, as I said, we took jointly with other countries, but we take responsibility for our share of that blunder. I think we understand that, but it is a heavy legacy and will take time and a great deal of effort and understanding. I think what will not help is to demonize Pakistan, to make Pakistan an alibi for the failure and mistakes of others. We are ready to acknowledge our share, but we cannot serve as an excuse for others who have also failed and carried out dysfunctional policies in Afghanistan. Thank you.
I've been writing about this issue for 25 years, and each time I just go and interview Ahmed Rashid and write down, pinch his ideas and publish them. So I feel very silly to be on a panel with him, unable to do so in this occasion. I agree with Mahila that the key has to be to leave the Afghans to decide their own future. If there's anything that Afghan history shows, it's that the Afghans do not like to have anyone impose their ways upon them. The Afghans have resisted at every stage in their history all attempts to have outside control. Very interesting, if you look at the Mughal period, you find that at the same time as the emperors were using all their resources to suppress revolts in Maharashtra with the Marathas and the other rebels around India, they didn't even begin to try to tame the Afridis and the Khyber tribes. Even at the time of Aurangzeb and Shah Jahan, huge subsidies were paid to keep the tribes quiet and to keep the roads open. They realized there was simply no way of taking on these guys, and they just effectively paid over protection money to stop them rebelling. Those who did rebel, like Khushal Khan Khattak, did so very successfully and defied the Mughals whenever they wanted to. The same has been true with, obviously, the British, who had 4 bloody noses successively in Afghanistan. We're now losing our 4th Afghan war. the Russians and the Americans. And it has to be an Afghan solution. I think the other thing which hasn't been mentioned is much of the key to the whole Pakistan relationship with Afghanistan, of course, reflects back onto the Pakistan relationship with India. And the failure of India and Pakistan to come to a peaceable and acceptable solution of their relationship with each other, and the continuing tensions that remain, which have left elements in the army remaining to patronize jihadi groups and feeling they need to do so since they can't defeat the huge Indian army by conventional means, seems to me to be much of the core of the problem. I am from a small country, Scotland, which is attached to a much larger neighbor. We are 5 million facing 50 million English people. And we came to what I thought was a pretty good solution with the Union. The last 3 prime ministers of Great Britain have all had Scottish surnames. We basically took them over. I think some sort of SARC union in the future, which had allowed borders on an EU basis, that allowed borders to be open, that calmed tensions, would immediately reduce tensions in Afghanistan and marginalize those elements that feel the need to patronize extremist elements.
You know, one important question that comes to my mind is that is Pakistan geopolitically cursed forever? Cursed to the extent that we can't really disengage from the Afghan theater? Is there any way out? Will the future peace in Pakistan, addressing the issue of Taliban and Talibanization, issuing the issue of this extremism that manifests itself in Pakistan in ethnic intolerance, in sectarian intolerance, in religious intolerance, in national intolerance, particularly our outlook towards the Western world, the modern world, towards Indians, are the whole, a new process of change, a positive change, normalization in Pakistan will take place through Kabul, through Delhi. My hint is that can Pakistan be settled, normalized on its own without addressing the issue of normalization of relations with India and normalization of state and society in Afghanistan? How much then, also it raises another question, that how much our troubles are because of this geopolitical curse, and how much are these troubles that Pakistan historically has faced due to our misunderstanding of history, our exaggerated self-image and self-perception, our exaggerated national goals, and what we wanted to achieve but could not achieve? So I leave this question, I think, to all of you.
Ahmed only passes on a question to me when he wants me to get into trouble. So his generosity is motivated. But I have to say, I think it's a very valid question. Pakistan is located on one of the world's geopolitical fault lines. There's no question about it. We didn't choose this neighborhood. We can't pack our bags and shift to another neighborhood. We've got to do the best that we can. But we haven't been able to do the best we can, partly because of our own policies, but also because of geopolitical goals that other countries have followed in this region. We are not responsible for that. We have been the victim of that, but at times we have tried to influence it in a manner that has been dysfunctional to the stability of Pakistan. There's no doubt about that. But I think your question is that at times our elites have thought that geopolitical location is an asset. In actual fact, it was a liability and a huge challenge that had to be navigated with with great prudence and anticipating possible future blowbacks of policies that were followed. Clearly, this was not done. And I think now we're at a point where we can absorb some of these lessons. As I said, we can't change our neighborhood, but I do think that one of the bright spots of the last year has been a very quiet process of improving the relationship with India. It obviously has not transformed entirely the geopolitical framework. There's deep suspicion, disputes have not been resolved, but I think there is an opening here that is being utilized, and we are moving in a direction because partly it's driven by the imperative of globalization. You simply have to do certain things because they make sense, because you live in a world that you don't define, you live in a bigger world. It makes sense to trade with India, it makes sense to have a peaceful border, especially since Afghanistan remains unsettled. So I think we have to recognize that this is a dynamic universe. It's not static, it is moving. Some movement is in a positive direction, some movement is not in a positive direction. But I think in our own country, we have to seize the destiny of our country in our own hands. Only we can transform our country. And if we have to give a vision of the future, which is shorn of the kinds of problems you're talking about, extremism, etc., that's for the political leadership to step forward and provide this vision. This vision can't come from outsiders, because the agenda of outsiders is rejected by the people of Pakistan. So whether the elites follow it or don't follow it, when people feel that this is somebody else's agenda, then either the political leadership has to convince the people that no, it is also convergent with our agenda, or it has to stop following it. I mean, you can't sail in two boats. You have to make up your mind and then provide that vision for the future, which is a vision going back to Muhammad Ali Jinnah. But where is that leadership to provide this vision? You can't do this shorn of a political context. This is not just about policing and military actions against extremism. It's fundamentally about hearts and minds. And hearts and minds are only one when you give people hope, when they know the road to the future lies in a certain direction and there is a vision. We're looking for the vision, we certainly don't have it.
You know, I don't think you can blame everything on our crisis in Afghanistan. There are two separate dynamics operating here. There has been a huge deterioration in governance in Pakistan. You know, the economy is in a very bad way, an insurgency in Baluchistan, Shia-Sunni killings, the killings in Karachi. You can't blame any of this on Afghanistan. This has been mismanagement by successive governments and the state apparatus itself. And unfortunately, the key institutions of the state have not been giving enough attention to the domestic crisis that has been evolving, not now, but for many years. After all, your economy doesn't collapse over 6 months or 1 year. It takes 5 or 10 years for this deterioration to set in. We have not invested in education. We've not invested in the social sector, etc. This is not the fault of Afghanistan. Where it has been is that I think our military, the intelligence services, the governments, whether it was the Musharraf government or before that in the 1990s, they have been far too preoccupied with Afghanistan. Too many of our resources have gone into Afghanistan. Too much of our foreign policy has been determined by Afghanistan. And it has led to hugely detrimental relations with outside powers. After all, in the 90s, we supported the Taliban. We were one of only 3 countries in the world that supported the Taliban. And we were hugely isolated at that point. You know, by the time of 9/11, we were really isolated from the rest of the global polity. Then we make a comeback with the American invasion. We become the key, you know, facilitator, etc., etc. But what happens then? The Taliban all retreat into, the Afghan Taliban all retreat into Pakistan. And, you know, they set up shop in Pakistan. They are helped with sanctuaries, and the leadership revives the movement in 2003, and then runs the movement basically from Pakistan. And there's nothing that we do about it. in fact, we consider that as a card that we can play, against the Americans, even though we are supporting the Americans. So now, all this kind of obsession, shouldn't we have been concentrated at that point in time in trying to gain the maximum advantage, trying to end the war as quickly as possible, persuading the international community, which was very difficult, persuading the Bush administration to open a dialogue with the Taliban, which is something that we're doing now, but unfortunately, and the Americans are finally doing, it's taken 11 years for the Americans to realize that you need a dialogue with the Taliban. So the issue has been that as far as Afghanistan is concerned, we have obsessed too much about it, we've put in too many resources, and we've hung our foreign policy on Afghanistan. On the geopolitical location, I was talking earlier this morning that this is a huge advantage. If this region was at peace, we are a land bridge between South and Central Asia, between the Middle East and Central Asia, and this land bridge has been there ever since the end of the Cold War, with pipelines and gas lines and electricity and roads and trade and all the rest of it. And we have not exploited it because we've not had the adequate foreign policy to do so.
I would like to come back to the same theme but with a different question. The question is that when the Americans and their allies came to Afghanistan with a lot of fury and with a lot of thunder, and bombs and everything, actually, this is one way of putting on it, that they really threw their weight on the side of the Northern Front. You may call them leaders, parties, warlords, whatever. And there were some voices within Pakistan as well as in the European world, continental Europe, including Britain, that, well, you don't ignore the other side. Its effects on the Pashtuns. What do they think that how the power shifted in favor of the northern minorities, and how in their historical memory the Pashtuns think of their own country, their own future, their own station in the Afghan society and power structure. Having said that, I would like you to address, and maybe I request first Malia on this, that while under Musharraf we made virtue out of necessity by being part of the war on terror, that was really the reigning slogan in the administration at that time, that we don't have another option, nobody will really trust our neutrality, we can't be neutral, virtue out of necessity. And some voices within Pakistan kept insisting that while you may continue the war, but rethink your strategy. Can you really win the war by military means alone? And won't it be prudent, keeping Afghan history, culture, jihad, nationalism, ethnicity, so many things in mind, can you talk? And of course, this suggestion was at least publicly in diplomatic forums rejected without giving any due attention or consideration. So my question is that has the American policy-making world, their knowledge of Afghanistan, their understanding of Afghan society and history changed, that they're serious, determined, that is the only way out?
No. Is it working? I'd like to answer your question in a slightly different way, which is to go back 11 years ago. It was 2 days after 9/11, and an American official said to me, "History begins today." It's a very interesting way of describing what had happened to the United States. But my point was not to share this with you, but to share something else, which is the United States today seeks a political solution in Afghanistan. It has initiated talks, direct talks with the Taliban. It acknowledges that there cannot be a military solution in Afghanistan. So I want to take you back in that context to the days after 9/11, to the weeks after 9/11, but before the attack on Afghanistan. Pakistan at that time said three things to the then administration. We said to them, don't go to war. Find a diplomatic solution to the issue of Osama bin Laden. Don't punish the people of Afghanistan. Don't punish the people of this region, because they're not responsible for what happened to you. The whole world is standing with you. Don't squander this. We may not have used those words, but that was the intent of our message. Don't go to war. Secondly, we said, distinguish between Al-Qaeda and the Taliban. The Taliban did not attack. Al-Qaeda did. If you separate the two, you may be able to get to a point where you find justice for what has happened to you without inflicting horror, the horror of war on others. Thirdly, we said if you do go to war, that war will be unwinnable for all the reasons that you have described earlier this morning. That war will be unwinnable, and therefore you will have to talk to those that you fight. Clearly, Pakistan's voice was not heard. But today, the United States, 11 years later, stands exactly where we had urged them to be. But in the process, our country was demonized. It was demonized for not having its heart in the war. It was demonized for not cooperating in what was a confused project in Afghanistan. It was so confused that when the Obama administration came in, it just carried out reviews upon reviews upon reviews of its Afghan policy. I've lost count, maybe Ahmed knows. How many reviews have they actually had? Superpowers never acknowledge mistakes. They carry out reviews of policy.
I think it's a very interesting moment now. The Western forces are now beginning to withdraw. And there is a huge question mark, obviously, about what's going to happen next. And I think we should be focusing, in a sense, on how to manage the next stage, which is likely to be very messy, but will have opportunities. My suspicion is that the religious element in the conflict will diminish. That the Afghans are very pragmatic in their use of jihad, and when it's useful, they will use the term and use the phrase and use the language. But my suspicion is it will change into more of an ethnic conflict again in the next stage, and it'll be Pashtuns facing Tajiks and facing the Northern Alliance. And I suspect that the language of jihad will fast diminish. It will revert to a situation closer to the situation prior to the rise of the Taliban, which of course produces many opportunities. There's all sorts of things that could be happening now. And there is all sorts of, I think, reason to believe that the younger generation of the Taliban are very different from the older generation, that they are not intractable, that they're quite clear they don't want any foreign interference, but they are open to various visions of what they do want Afghanistan to be and who its allies are to be. I suspect that Pakistan and the West will both be regarded with suspicion by the entity that emerges in the next stage. I think there's a huge amount of resentment against Pakistan by the Taliban, as there is against the West. There's a deep hatred of what the West has done and the failures of the West and the wasted opportunities. When you arrive in Kabul, the big surprise for me on my first trip was, after so long in there wasn't even a proper road from the airport to the American embassy. I mean, there's not a bizarre town in this country which has as poor roads as the main capital of Afghanistan. There is no infrastructure at all. They've only just put in street lighting last year. And there's no demonstration that the West has done anything for this country, other than schools. The one thing you see there, which was not there before, every morning in Kabul, those kids, including the girls in their white hijabs, going off en masse to the schooling. But other than the growth of schooling, it's very little to see all the billions and billions that have been pumped into that country, and almost nothing to show for it.
I agree with the points which were made by the different speakers, but I would like to emphasize one point, especially having been in Afghanistan this autumn. I've been to Afghanistan twice, once 6 years ago and once again this autumn, and I see the tendency outside Afghanistan, speaking with Pakistanis, but also sometimes in the West, somehow to romanticize the Taliban now, as if they are some, some warrior who have legitimate interest in Pakistan, in Afghanistan. They are not perceived as this in Afghanistan itself, even not in the south anymore. It has been different. When I've been there 6 years ago, still in the south at least, people were somehow at least were seeing the Taliban very, with different eyes, but they differentiated. They saw that at that time, that at least there was justice, there was security, and so on. But this time, when I went to the south, with all the people who I'm speaking, also with old Taliban who has changed these sides, they were saying that these are not the Taliban anymore. The Taliban have changed. They got very brutal these days. And even, I didn't find a single person in the north who was unhappy that the Taliban went back, went outside the country. But I suspected that I would meet them in the south, some sympathy for the Taliban. But this as well has changed dramatically in the last years with the way the Taliban has acted in the last 4 or 5 years, the new tactic against the civilians. The things are quite complicated. It's not a war of the West against the Afghan people. It's, with all the ambivalences of the Western policies in Afghanistan. But now many people in Afghanistan are fearful, even in the south, that when the West is leaving the country, it could at least fall in part back to the hand of Taliban. And the future of Taliban, as my perception was after coming back, was not that there's one solution for Afghanistan, but the country, the national state, which is very weak right now, will get more weak, even more weak in the future. So you have a completely different situation in the south. Then you have a complete different situation in the big cities. The north will go its own way. The west will go its own way. So you will have Afghanistan on the map, but you won't have a vital state. That is, I think, the biggest threat at the moment. That Afghanistan will stay in name, but it's not, will not have it's not a vital country with a strong government which, will govern the country.
I want to invite your attention to the issue of cultural shift in Pakistan. This is a polarized view. And the debate in scholarly literature as well as on the media and in Pakistani society and social circles is equally polarized. This debate is about how a pluralistic society of Pakistan with a lot of accommodation within different communities during the last 3 decades has changed. One view is that, because of 3 cycles of conflict in Afghanistan, our state policy of supporting jihadi organizations in Kashmir and in Afghanistan, and state patronage of certain selective groups within the country, the Middle Eastern money, and Arab-Iranian competition and rivalry being played out in Pakistan. So many factors have created this cultural shift The one view is that it is real, it is there, and perhaps it's not going to go away anytime soon. The other view is that while yes, all these things have happened, but then we can get back to the real Pakistani society if we do this. So there are optimistic and pessimistic views, but I would like to benefit from your insights of the history, of the culture of this region, and comment, is this cultural shift decisive, or it is so much exaggeration of this cultural shift? Where do you see Pakistani society in terms of this polarized view?
Well, there's no doubt what you're saying is absolutely true. But again, we go back to this question, do we blame outsiders for this? Do we blame the Indians, or do we blame the Arabs for Arab money? Or do we blame ourselves for, poor governance, for successive poor governance, for having the wrong foreign policy, for not focusing on the economy and all the other things that modern nation states have done, especially after the end of the Cold War, and the opportunities that have opened up to countries in Asia and Africa after the end of the Cold War. We have not taken advantage of any of those things, unfortunately. Our economy, we're still producing, somebody was saying we're producing so much cotton and so much rice. We're still producing the same goods that we were producing 30 years ago, 40 years ago. We haven't created a single new major industry in this country which would take us forward into the 21st century. So I think the real factor is, unfortunately, is poor governance inside the country. And yes, there have been a lot of external factors, which of course have fed on our internal weaknesses. The fact that, of India, of the Arabs, the Shia-Sunni conflict being funded from outside, etc. The fact is that, Pakistan is in a much more fragile state today because of its internal contradictions. We did not have an insurgency in Balochistan 10 years ago that is bad as it is today. We did not have the situation in FATA and the Northwest as it is today. We did not have the situation in Karachi as it was 10 years ago. So we can keep on blaming foreigners, outsiders, etc. But I think the real cause is we have to look inwards, and we have to focus inwards on rebuilding this nation and this state, and put our resources into that. We have to absolve ourselves of foreign policy ambitions and aggressive behavior, and focus on what is necessary inside the country.
I would like to, when we continue this discussion, I would like to take two questions from the floor. One from this side and one from this side. Okay, anybody from this side? No. Okay.
This is a question from Mr. Ahmed Rashid. Ms. Baliha Lodi quite confidently asserted that we have learnt several lessons from Afghanistan. My question to you is, our shadow rulers in GHQ and their colleagues in APARA, have they learnt any lesson from Afghanistan? And if they have, what are they?
Sorry, you're saying has the GHQ learned the lesson from Afghanistan?
Now, Ms. Lodi quite confidently asserted that because of Afghanistan in the last 10 years, we have learned a lot of lessons. We, she said. So my question to you is, we might have, but have our shadow rulers learnt anything?
Have our rulers learned anything?
Well, it's a good question, and it's still out there, But I think, for example, the support that we want to give to a dialogue between the Taliban and the Karzai government is something very positive. But at the same time, we have to say we have, our relationship with the United States has collapsed. At this precise moment when we needed a positive relationship with the United States to be able to further the process of dialogue between the Taliban and the Americans and the Taliban and Karzai. So I would say that there are pluses and there are minuses. How we are going to restore our relationship with the US, how we're going to come back into the peace process in Afghanistan. And clearly we have to play a role because the Taliban leadership is sitting in Pakistan. There's still 2 million Afghan refugees and thousands of fighters in Pakistan who are prepared to go into Afghanistan. So the role for Pakistan, unfortunately, is still there. The question is that, we have to rebuild our relationship with the United States, with Iran, with a lot of neighboring states. And we cannot reject the future of India's role in Afghanistan either. And we have to come to terms with that in some form or the other. Hopefully, as William was saying, through discussion and being able to limit that role perhaps. But you can only do that through discussion. You can't do that through launching suicide attacks in Kashmir or Delhi or anywhere else. So I think there are a whole range of problems which are completely overwhelmed at the moment by the domestic political crisis. We don't know if this government is going to last another week. And until we resolve our domestic crisis, we're going to be faced with huge foreign policy problems that the whole world is asking, what is our role? What is Pakistan's role in Afghanistan? And we really can't answer that question because we've got this domestic crisis.
One more question? Yes, sir.
Sorry. Yeah, hi. More than the domestic crisis, what William mentioned earlier on, and the panel seemed to more or less agree, that peace with India, the assertion is that the peace with India is the only way forward for sustainable future or regional peace in South Asia. Now, we all know, as the gentleman there mentioned, that Pakistan's national security policy is decided in Rawalpindi, not in Islamabad, or at least more or less structured in Rawalpindi. And how will we make the army out there, and our intelligence forces, understand that peace with India is the only way forward, given that their survival in terms of getting all the money depends on the inherent, the existential threat that they face from India? So how will the people of Pakistan, and more than that, the army, understand peace with India and a tighter, closer South Asia is the only way forward? Thank you very much.
I don't think there's any constituency in Pakistan that opposes dialogue with India. Not one. Not even the Jamaat-e-Islami says no dialogue. People may dispute the terms of the dialogue, but there is no constituency in Pakistan that opposes dialogue. And I think if you look at the military's role in recent years, some of the most dramatic breakthroughs actually occurred under military rulers, which is not a recipe for the future, but it just goes to show that the military has tended to promote and not impede. Even now, the opening of the trade dialogue has not been obstructed or blocked by the military. So I think we need to be clear about this, that there is a national consensus which wants trade with India, which wants peace with India, but it takes two to make peace. Peace doesn't come by declaring it. Peace comes through a word that Anatole used all afternoon today, negotiation. You have to negotiate. And it's the terms on which you negotiate peace that ensures that that peace lasts and it's enduring. You don't make peace with yourself. You make peace with your adversary or a country which was once your enemy. So I think we need to come out of the shadow of our own past. Yes, some of our past did point in the direction that you're pointing, but I think we moved beyond that, and that's a general point I want to make. I think sometimes our discussion tends to be too anchored in the past. If we look at the universe in which we live, it's a very dynamic universe. Things change. There's a dynamic change that is occurring in this region. Some of it is being brought about not by governments. It's being brought about by the forces of globalization. That is creating new imperatives for cooperation. So governments, frankly, can't even do very much about them. We have to recognize some of these things in moving forward. So I think there is, that's the bright spot, as Afghanistan is still, there's a lot of uncertainty about Afghanistan. I think there's greater uncertainty, ironically, about Pakistan and India, which is not to say we're there yet, but at least the dialogue is going on. And the last conversation that occurred between India and Pakistan in Islamabad, which was in December, was about nitty-gritty issues to deal with military and nuclear CBMs. That's quite an advance for the two countries to be sitting across the table and talking about things like bomb-making material, how to create greater confidence between two nuclear nations. This is not sexy stuff because it doesn't make the headlines, but it is the nitty-gritty stuff which is needed to create confidence.
I would like to address a very specific question to William. And the question is that in the light of your scanning of history, going back, how hopeful you are that during next 2 to 5 years, Americans end their war in Afghanistan, they are either gone or they stay in small cantonments hidden from Afghan population. There is some reconciliation between the Taliban and the Northern Front, and we are back in a situation in the region somewhat similar to what the region was, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India were sometimes. Of course, we can't repeat the history, but in terms of peace, order, and stability, can be something like 1977.
My strong suspicion is that we will see what is the norm in Afghan history, which is the fragmentation of authority in that country. There have been very brief periods throughout history only when Afghanistan has been centrally ruled. In the 1880s by Abdurrahman, again in the 1930s, briefly in the 1970s. But for the overwhelming length of Afghan history, the country has been massively splintered, and it has very rarely been a coherent country. It has occasionally suited the various chiefs to come together under the Duranis or under the Barakzais or under whatever ruling dynasty provided opportunities for plunder elsewhere or made it worthwhile to cohere. But it's not naturally a coherent country. It's only very rarely come together. My strong suspicion is that it will, in reality, fragment. Whether that means political fragmentation formally, no one can tell yet. It's certainly a possibility. But it may just dissolve into a far looser association than it did. I mean, the Taliban period was a very brief and very odd moment of centralized control. And the Taliban were one of the very few governments who, for all the other atrocities that they committed, did provide security, did provide, you could drive around the country at night very easily, and it did cohere into a centralized state at huge cost to the women and to many other constituents, particularly in the north. But I think we're heading for a period of decentralization in Afghanistan. Whether that will mean also a period of conflict, the jury remains out.
Well, you may well be right, but I also think that there will be a settlement. Because I think the Afghans are totally exhausted by war, number one. Number two, they're exhausted by being the playground for the superpowers, the Soviet Union, the Americans, etc. They're exhausted from being the playground of the neighboring states, Iran, Pakistan, India, Central Asia, the Arabs, etc. And I think what we are going to see in Afghanistan is increasingly, as we are seeing even in the Taliban today, is not jihad and Islamism and all this, but a much stronger Afghan nationalism. A desire for all Afghans to come together and to work out something. Now, what they work out may well be what you're describing, something looser, a federation, something not centralized, something to which it will be very difficult for the Western mind to grapple with, or even for us to grapple with, because you won't know how to conduct development or education and things like that. But nevertheless, I think there will be a settlement. The real issue is what's going to happen in Pakistan, and that's where I think a far bigger crisis looms for us, as to whether we are going to be able to get our act together and resolve our own internal differences and unrest. Because at the moment, unfortunately, I mean, in Afghanistan, you can say that there's Afghan nationalism, which can be a kind of cement. Is there such a thing as Pakistani nationalism that can emerge out of this crisis that we're in right now and be a kind of cement for a better government and a better society? And I think that's the key issue in this region.
I would like to add one general point, not with view of the Afghan or the Pakistan history, but with view of the European history. Europe had fought for 100 or 150 years and has made 2 world wars because of the idea of the national state. The national state is some unifying concept of dealing with diversity. It has led to millions of 30, 40 million deaths, has led to the deaths of whole people, of the Jews, of the Gypsies. So Europe has a catastrophic history with nationalism, with the idea of national state. And it was only after 2 world wars that the idea came into mind that maybe the national state is maybe not such a brilliant idea. And they came and they built up this idea of the European community, which was a quite successful idea, although it may has now its financial crisis. But the European idea of bringing together states, of giving away national sovereignty, of unifying, that has led to situations that 2 countries like Germany and France, who were much more in odd as India and Pakistan are today. I mean, 50 years ago, it was not possible for a German to get a hotel room in France. Even in my generation, when I was, I grew up in Germany, when we had the pupils exchange, I was 13. The German students, the German pupils, they had difficulties to find families in France because the grandparents didn't accept Germans in their house. They had 150 years of really, really wars together. And it was the European idea, the European community, who helped to transcend this idea that in the national state, blood, culture, language, religion should be one. Although the situation on ground is completely different. Cities like Berlin, like Prague, like Vienna, like Istanbul, like Saloniki, they were completely multicultural, multi-religious states. Many languages were spoken, many religions were living. And so it was the bizarre thing is that after Europe has made this catastrophic experiences at other parts of the world, like in Pakistan, like in Israel, they went into the trap of the national state. That's the idea that there should be some common ground, like the religion or the ethnic race or the blood or the language that is the unifying power. And I think for all the region of Pakistan, of India, of Kashmir, there are no solutions on the ground of the national state. I mean, there will only be a solution if one overcomes, transcendence this idea. I mean, there won't be a solution of Kashmir on the base of a national state like it was dreamt of 50 years ago. Only if one overcomes the idea and open up border and makes the national state less relevant, then there might be a solution for the Afghan problem, for the Kashmir problem, for the Pakistan problem, and the Indian problem as well.
A small number of soldiers out there, but it's very clear that it's out the door in Afghanistan. It's also going a lot of things alone in Afghanistan. Reconciliation, for example, it's really pushing its own track, and the popularity of the U.S. here is obviously very low. So given all those 3 things, what are the reasons why should Pakistan support the U.S. in its version of the endgame in Afghanistan, giving up groups along the border that it's supported in the past? What does Pakistan gain from that? And why should it do that? And if I could just quickly ask William and Naveed, we've talked about fragmentation of Afghanistan. Do you believe that that actually could work? It could actually create a stable country? Thank you.
Okay, let me take it first and then Ahmed, because I think I followed part of your question. First of all, Pakistan welcomes the United States moving towards a political strategy and searching for peace in Afghanistan. It welcomes President Obama's desire to wind down the war in Afghanistan, because Pakistan and Pakistanis believe this war has brought grief to Pakistan, as indeed to this region. It has destabilized Pakistan, and therefore any effort to wind the war down would be welcome. Pakistan will assist in any effort that it is asked to assist in helping reach this political solution without trying to preempt anybody, without trying to determine any kind of outcome in Afghanistan, because Pakistan is neither in a position nor does it have the desire. Both. It has no capacity, nor does it have the desire to determine an outcome. It is for the Afghans to do, but once the United States begins to draw down, Pakistan believes that the continued presence of foreign forces does not allow Pakistan to fully crack down on extremists, because it is a recruiting sergeant for many extremists in Pakistan. Once that recruiting sergeant is taken away, Pakistan will have a better opportunity to deal with. I think Pakistan has also learnt the lesson that FATA can no longer be maintained as a strategic space, which is what the history has been. Pakistan has tried to establish the writ of the state, and that is the first visible indication. I know there are people who are skeptical in the audience, but the record is there. You've seen what has happened in the last few years. We've seen forces go in and try to establish the writ of the state within the federally administered tribal areas.
Okay.
So I think we are on the same page, but as Ahmed said earlier, the irony is that just when US and Pakistani goals are more convergent than they ever have been in 11 years, the relationship is mired in deep mistrust, deep suspicion, and frankly, the burden of history. I mean, we do carry this burden, but we don't carry this alone. That's the only point I was trying to make, that we will take responsibility for what we were able or not able to do, but we'd like to ask the others also to take responsibility for what they were and were not able to do. Only with that approach, I think, can we move forward. This whole notion of, heaping everything on Pakistan, if only Pakistan didn't do this, we would have won the war in Afghanistan. I think it's a travesty of the facts, it's a travesty of history.
I think I'll request Ahmed Rashid to make a brief comment, and we will end our session with the last word from William Dalrymple.
Look, I couldn't fully understand your question, but the United States is in retreat from this part of the world for all sorts of reasons. If you look at Iraq, you look at what's happening, the US role or lack of role in the Middle East, and its desire to focus more on East Asia and China, it is definitely, in the long term, in the strategic term, it is in retreat. It wants to pull its forces out of Afghanistan as soon as possible. But it does want to leave behind some kind of stable government. Now, I think Pakistan here is faced with the role of, are we going to facilitate a quick US withdrawal with a minimal kind of governance in Afghanistan, a minimal kind of reconciliation between the Taliban and the Northern Alliance and the Karzai government? Or are we going to be putting our own demands on any kind of peace deal and extracting our pound of flesh, as it were? And that will, of course, encourage other neighboring countries to do the same, Iran, Russia, Central Asia, India, and that will lead to another round of what we had in the 90s, where all the neighbors were fighting over each other. So what I think, I hope that we facilitate a peace process which can work as quickly as possible. Most of the Taliban leadership is in Pakistan, and I think we can, there's a major role obviously here for Pakistan. But the role has to be where we facilitate, where we do not make demands upon the Afghans or anyone else.
Please.
As to the question of whether a decentralized Afghanistan could work, I think it can, and I think it always has been. Afghanistan has never been a country which has had a strong sense of coherence. It's been the space left in between other empires around it. It isn't like Iran, which has had very clear boundaries historically. It has always been the space left by other empires. I think the big question also in the future has now got to be the role of China. China has bought the mineral rights to almost everything in Afghanistan. And the Afghans I've talked to are very clear that the Chinese are the next potential occupiers or dominators of their country. And how that will play vis-a-vis India and Pakistan is going to be one of the great interesting questions of the next few years.
Thank you very much, panelists. So far, I think this was the best panel I have attended here. I would like to ask you to give a big hand for the panelists. Thank you very much. Thank you.